Zoom call. I hope you guys have enjoyed these. We've been doing them for about a month and a half now. This is going to be our last one. We're going to take a break for a few weeks, and then we'll probably try to do something again in July. Today's mega seminar, we're going to do this one for 30 minutes, and then at 2:30, Arlo's going to take over and do one on supervising staff. And then at 3 o'clock, Arlos will lead another one on what does it look like if we have to go to 50, which will be a big issue for all of us. And then at 3:30, Bill's going to moderate a session on resources, books, podcasts that are helpful for us as collegiate ministers. But I want to get right into it. I'm going to start off with Joel Bratcher. I've asked Joel Bratcher, a little bit Stevens, and to share with us first, and then Joel Bratcher about their international ministries and their passion for it, what they do in their areas, and then I'll kind of close this up at the very end. So Joel, why don't you go ahead and share what you do there at A&M for a few minutes, and then we'll go from there, okay?
Sure. Thanks, Steve. Well, just a little bit of the demographics. A&M, we have about 6,000 international students. They, by and large, are mostly graduate students. So, you know, it's a lot of families also. The other thing we have are a lot of visiting scholars, about 1,200. And so our ministry is, we're dealing with older students, and for the most part, and usually really, really bright people, obviously. Our work, a little more demographics. The two largest populations are Chinese and Indian students almost every year. We have a lot of Iranian students. We have a lot of Korean students, and then a lot of Central and South American students. So obviously those are all really different groups of people. And so our ministry, some of the things we do in the way of engaging internationals, we try to look for felt needs that they have as one way to meet them. And so we've offered English classes for a long time, and that's a big help and an entry point with them. We also, a number of years ago, we started doing a giveaway for new international students in our building with furniture and household goods, and that opens a ton of doors. Sometimes we'll be able to help, 200 to 250 new students, and so that opens a lot of doors. We offer our services to International Student Office. We help with new student conferences and that kind of thing, and then we offer conversation partners to students, some that are involved in BSM in large ways and other ways. So just kind of meeting needs. Our goal really with international is kind of twofold. Number one, we want to go from large to small. We want to try to help our internationals connect with Christians to have meaningful relationships and have a chance to begin reading the Bible with people, and in settings that make sense to them, where they can ask questions and dialogue with people. I think that's really pivotal. The internationals that we see come to Christ each year, there are usually two main components to it. One is that they're encountering Christian community. They're meeting real Christians that care about them, and they're seeing those people weekly, regularly. And then number two, they're having a chance to engage with the Bible. And so we really work hard at that in trying to help them be actively engaged, trying to train our American students to lead Bible studies and have relationships with them that help them break through some of the cultural barriers, and helping our students learn. And I think that's the other thing that's so awesome about international work, is the impact it has on your American students. It's one of the greatest discipleship tools in the world. And we just see American students all of the time that end up feeling called to missions, sometimes overseas, or they'll choose to move to a city in the U.S. with their career so that they can work with refugees. God just gets hold of our American students' hearts through this, and so it's such a cool experience, and I really love it. I love it too, just because it helps our American students learn so much more about the Bible, because internationals ask questions that things that we just assume, and so it impacts our students deeply, our American students, and then and it's just fun. It's great. It's great for them to try to learn what does it mean to do cross-cultural ministry, and then to involve students, internationals, in what we do. Some of the other practical ministry kind of things we do, we learned early on that Indian students and Chinese students don't always mix well, and so we have different ministries for them. We have an evening Chinese dinner and Bible study that we break into small groups with, and that's been really helpful. With Indian students, and we have an outreach lunch each week also for Americans and internationals, and that's another good entry point where we begin introducing the gospel. But we'll have a talk, and then one week we just talk around the tables, but that's a great way for relationships to form. We have a lot of Indian students that live very close to our building, and so one of the things we do is we call it Time for Chai. And on Friday evenings, we have chai and games, and we have American students come and then Indians come, and we partner with another Indian organization on campus, and that has been a great entry point. And some Friday nights, we may have 200, 250 Indian students. And so for our American students that come, it's just a great way to start building friendships. And if you've worked with Indian students, you know, Hindus it's a challenge, and it takes a lot of time and relationship, but that's been a wonderful connecting point with them. What we try to do too, we have weekly small group studies for international students, but usually what happens, it's organic. It'll be our students as they're building friendships. They start reading the Bible one-on-one with internationals, or they'll invite them to small groups. The other thing that our guys did this year that we had never done before, but it's really been fruitful, is we've started doing what we call community groups. And we partner about 5 or 6 American students together, and then we do some training with them, but then they reach out to international friends that they have, and they invite them weekly to one of their homes or the apartments, and they have dinner together. They just have discussion together. And they'll have like a topic of the night, and invariably it turn into gospel conversations, and very often then Bible studies that begin happening, a lot of times one-on-one with people in the group. And that's been a real game changer for us. A lot of the internationals that we've seen come to Christ this year, that's been a key component to it, and they love it. They love it. We had 2 Chinese visiting scholars that just came to Christ during coronavirus, but they've been engaged all year, and it's really these American students that have led them to Christ, and they have deep relationships. So it's really, really cool. I think the other thing coronavirus has shown me is that we're just seeing some really cool stuff happen with internationals that have already been gone that are reconnecting with us. And Rebecca, my associate, has been able to help one of our visiting scholars in Mexico start a Bible study with some of her faculty members in her department in Mexico City. So, you know, just some cool stuff like that. But we do that. You know, and most of it's pretty basic. It's relationships big time. And we just try to foster that. We try to challenge our American students to have international friends. And if they're around our BSM very long, they'll have plenty of opportunities to do that. And, you know, we do a lot of different things. It varies, but that's kind of the core of what we do. So.
Guys, that's Joel. That's so good. Joel, I've learned a lot from Joel, and I've learned a lot from Gary and Bit. And we're going to come back for questions you might have for Joel and for him at the end. Gary, why don't you go ahead and share right now, would you please? Gary Stidham. Okay.
Yeah, you bet. I'm Gary right here. I serve at the University of Texas at Arlington. And my claim to fame is Joel Bratcher was my predecessor. So any good thing that I've got here, I probably inherited from Joel. But that was 17 years ago. So I've been in this role for 17. And a little bit about our demographics. We're kind of the urban university, the metro university for Dallas-Fort Worth. So we're about 45,000 students, 6,000 to 7,000 internationals. Because we have a lot of commuters, our internationals are concentrated on campus. So if you're on our campus, you see, especially on a weekend, probably a full 60% of the students on campus after hours are international. So it's really in your face. It's a wonderful opportunity. And so one of the reasons I came here is because of that opportunity, a missions heart, and there's a strong history of international ministry here already. We have a lot of programs similar to what Joel outlined. I think the one thing I'd add to the conversation is the old Peter Drucker quote, where he says, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And honestly, I think my conviction is the structures and programs and strategies that we have matter a lot less than the culture of evangelism and discipleship we develop with our American students. And so we, in our ministry, have a strong culture of evangelism, 2x2 evangelism, starting evangelistic or discovery Bible studies. We do every Friday, we have a classroom style ministry training where we teach evangelism skills and how to lead a seeker Bible study, how to do cold evangelism, how to interact with a Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist worldview kinds of issues. We're one of those rare ministries that still does 2x2 evangelism. And so we talk to a lot of internationals that way, and we use those cold conversations as a filter to find people of peace. And so we go out several times a week in pairs and just do people of peace search and strike up spiritual conversations, ask a lot of questions, and filter through and try to find students that would be interested in just reading the Bible together. But because our American students are challenged to share their faith a lot and it's in their face, we just say like a broken record, we're not a Christian fellowship. We're a ministry. We're a missions organization. We're here to impact the campus for Christ. If we're not reaching the campus and we don't have any reason to exist. So we just say that over and over, and it affects your culture, especially if you've got evangelistic staff. Another thing that we have had a lot of success with is just integrating internationals thoroughly through our ministry at every level. We find that a lot of internationals don't want to be siloed off into like a standalone international ministry. And so especially the Latin Americans and the Africans. So we have them that are just serve on our mainstream student leadership team. So we'll have internationals who are leading Americans in small group Bible study because they may come from they may have a stronger Christian background than some of our American students do. And so instead of just saying you're an international, you need to work with internationals, we give them the opportunity to mainstream if that's the best place for them. We also, just some of our programs that might be unique from what Joel's already described. We work with a couple other ministries and a big group of churches to do what we call the Big Howdy. So every August and January, we do a series of 2 to 3 weeks of welcome events. One of the key ones that I organize is airport pickup. So we get incoming students register for a ride from DFW Airport to campus. It's about a 20-minute commute, and there's no public transportation. So we recruit volunteers from among our American students and from our local churches. And we pair them with incoming internationals. And so when they step off the plane, the first person they see is a believer in Jesus who's there to serve them and meet their needs. And we give those volunteers some training so that when they make that connection, then they can follow up with those new students as the weeks go on. So if the student needs a ride to the store to get some groceries or household items or whatever, and maybe the family gives them an invitation to their home for dinner. And a lot of those relationships become long-term friendships, and we see some of those students come to Christ. And then probably the most powerful thing we do is when we get international students in one-on-one or two-on-one discovery Bible studies where they're just reading the Bible with another believer or with a believer, that's where we see the most conversion happen, is whenever an international just starts reading the Gospels with another believer. But we have a weekly dinner on Thursday nights that alternates. One week is just a pizza party, and then the other week is a group Bible study. We do several trips and social outings through the year, and that's UTA.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that, Gary. And like I said, guys, I've called both of those two guys and Teresa, too. You're going to hear from a bit, Stevens.
Hello, everyone. It's good to see you all and be a part of this. So thankful for all of you and what you're doing. Man, it's exciting to listen to Joel and Gary. That's wonderful what's been happening there. And a lot of my job is international student ministry consultant for the state of Arkansas. And so what I get to do is help BCMs and churches around those BCMs to help them get the vision and the mobilization down to do what you guys are already doing. But you're doing on a level that we've got a long way to go to get to that point. Some good things that have happened here in the Little Rock Conway and Russellville area is we partner with a group called International Friendship Outreach. What makes IFO so unique is that they are not a registered organizational campus, which that benefits a lot for connecting with the admin who are maybe become hostile toward Christian organizations. They are a Christian organization, but because they're not an RSO, that keeps them from, it protects them to be able to work directly with the churches so they don't have to have non-Christians be a part of their organization. But we filter a lot of that through BCM, and there's where the students can come in and be a part of that ministry where they can be loved with the gospel, and that just makes it a neat marriage kind of for those ministries to come together. The Conversation Club, it's housed in the BCM there where Adam Venters, he's on here, where he's the campus minister there. There he is on vacation. He doesn't know how to take vacation like his father-in-law, I think. So, but anyway, a lot of neat things going on. Like Joel said, it's been exciting to see some of the ones come to faith in Christ through this COVID epidemic, and just the questions that they've had, and been able to people have been able to pour a little bit deeper into them. Our goal is to help, like you guys are doing, welcome them well, evangelize them, disciple them, get them into some discovery groups, and to send them out. And used to say send them home, but a lot of times they won't go back home. They'll go to major cities, and you're going to find a multicultural, diverse from every nation almost around the world, that in the places they'll go. So helping train them and equip them to cross-culturally share their faith is wonderful opportunity. I went to New York before all this hit back in November, and was going up there checking out possibilities where we could actually take international students on mission trips so they could get that experience of cross-cultural evangelism. And so something like that is a great idea to think about, just to help get them equipped to and more out of their comfort zone to go out and share the gospel with others and stuff. Anyway, I don't really have anything new to add. Just what we're trying to do is to try to cast the vision here in Arkansas. I'm a part of the BC Net also, and a lot of the vision I have here for our state has come from that particular group that has been a wonderful role model for me in the way that they're ministering. Teresa Royals on that, and we claim Tom Knight, even though he's stepped away a little bit from us and stuff, and Van Simmons and some other things. By the way, Chad Stillwell sent out an email a little while ago about a new Muslim site that is out there. And I tried getting on there. And if any of y'all received the email and you can get on there successfully, would you please let me know how you did that? Because it's very confusing for me in downloading that. Steve, I'll go ahead and give it back to you and let you ask questions or whatever, because I know these guys share some great things.
Yeah, well, you guys, anybody have a question for any one of these three for sure?
Well, I have a question for them as well as anyone, because what I'm curious about, we too have done airport pickups, and we've always had like a big welcome activity for new students. But in talking with their international office last week, no visas are being issued for new students coming in. So, I'm just trying to prepare myself. I've been preparing our international team of students. I'm just not sure that this fall is going to be like we've had before. And I just wanted some feedback from the rest of you. Are you encountering the same thing? And just any kind of words from anyone in this group.
What I'm hearing is that there'll be virtually no undergrads coming, and the grad students will be very, very, very significantly reduced.
Yeah. I talked to someone in the international office on Saturday, and they're hoping that some of the new numbers will begin going up in January, but I'm hearing pretty much what Gary is. And even some new grad students will begin their programs online too. That's the other thing I've heard.
Guys, I'll kind of I'll share a little bit of something. Most of what I'm doing, I've copied from these guys, so I won't share anything about that. We do a dinner and we do a lunch thing. One thing I would say about our lunch program, about half our students that attend our Monday lunch, which is provided by our church as a traditional speaker type thing, we've had really good success with questions from Teresa Vitt-Stevens. She does a great job with cultural type questions, and you can email her and she'll give those to you. And we've used those a lot. And so what we do now is we have a table host at each table, and it'll be 4 or 5 American students, 4 or 5 international students, and it's very organized questions. And that's the main devotional time for our Monday lunch. That's been very successful for us. The second thing, you guys, we've been doing international food to go bags, and that's been this phenomenal ministry this summer. Talked to a girl last week. She graduated in May. She was going to go home. She can't go home. She can't have a job. Her funding LSU has ended. So what does she do? And there's actually probably hundreds of thousands of them in that similar situation that are trapped here. But that's been really good for us. And we started doing it to meet the need of the international students. You guys understand that that's our priority for doing it. We would do it, but it has been a really good, publicity, if that thing's a public relations thing, a combination of ministry. I've had several pastors and alums, first time I'll see them, how's your international ministry going? It's been really good for us. One of the things we want to be is a value of our ministry. And so that's been something that's been very, very helpful for people to be reminded that why we're doing what we're doing. So we got about 5 more minutes. I think somebody else have another question you want to ask any one of these 3 or share something you're doing.
I'll just update you on something that happened for us. About 10 years ago, one of the professors at our campus, who was an atheist, trusted Christ, and now he's doing ministry. Teresa knows him, he's Keith Wade and these different guys. But they started a Saturday morning Bible study with Chinese that we knew here and have known around, and that's a Zoom Bible study. And they had just kind of a bunch of different people joined it. Some folks who have been brought back home, missionaries would have come home, and what they do is, if the time frame is from 9 to 11, which is 9 to 11 where they are at night. It's a 12-hour time difference. And the 4th meeting, 400 Chinese showed up on that website. And they have broken it down into small groups. They have different professors or different speakers do for 30 minutes. And the next hour and a half, they have a breakout group. And so a lot of these different missionaries who have come home, some live in Vermont, some Boston, Virginia, and some of them live here. They grab a small group of Chinese and they keep that Zoom conversation going.
Wow.
And it's just something that's worked. And there are some these missionary guys showed us how not to do it and how to do it, how to protect them, which vehicles to use, which ones not to use as far as the conversation tools. So if you have any students who have leanings, they thought, I really wanted to do some international ministry, I'm kind of stuck here now, that's something you might look into. Grab a couple of the students that they know that they can contact with, and they just sort of gather each other into this thing. Kind of interesting thing, 2 weeks ago, one of the former missionary, or still a missionary, but she's been stuck in Boston now, she contacted us, and she had been conversating with a medical student in Wuhan, and she trusted Christ with her after that Zoom meeting that morning just 2 weeks ago. So that's just something if you're to look into, if you have some students or some staff who are kind of sitting around wondering, what can I do now while I'm sequestered here?
That's great, John. I want to know who that missionary stuck in Boston is. So since I'm representing Boston, if you could
it's you. Michael, it was you the whole time. You're the one
it was me. I didn't even know it. But just to represent quick, I'm in the middle of leading our English Zoom class. I don't know if you guys talked about that, but it is working really great. We have 20 people on my desktop computer right there that you can't see, and they're talking even without me because I have a couple of volunteers and we can do breakout groups, and it just works out great. So we've been able to continue those relational things that we did in person, and Zoom has really helped us to now be able to follow up with people that I'll send this blanket email to 350 people that have come to our English classes and Bible studies for the last 3 years, only in small groups. And I don't know who's still here, and I can't keep track of all of them, but people will show up from Mongolia, from Japan, from China, from Egypt, from Saudi Arabia, from all over the place, and just like wave and say hi. and it's an amazing thing. And so I would just say, yeah, this is not something that we're happy about. I'm not happy that my daughter's wedding in a week can't be her wedding in a week because of COVID, but there are some tremendous things that are happening because of Zoom and other things. Yeah, I just boil it down to don't underestimate saying hi, being a true friend, genuinely with empathy, caring for that international friend. And you can love them into the kingdom, as we see happens through God's Spirit leading us. Keep up the good work. I'm glad to pop on for just a second.
You know, Steve, one thing I would say too, those of you that, a lot of you already know this, but international ministry is one of the greatest ways to involve churches and even to help shape their culture toward missions. The other thing that's incredibly helpful, when you have a Muslim student or a Hindu student come to Christ, there's a very good chance they're going to be kicked out by their family, and it's going to create a lot of problems with financial issues and things like that. And I know I feel a real burden to help those students when it helps it. And so I need our churches. I need them to partner, and whether it's helping us find a car for a student or a lot of, sometimes being a family that adopts a student. We've had situations, you know, in all those areas. So that's one of the things I'd add to it is you're thinking forward about as students come to Christ, what does that mean in helping disciple them and help them be, because they need a family at that point, and we have to become it. So
I want to echo what, I'm sorry, Joel said. It's just, this really does breathe life into churches as well as the students. And it helps them to feel like they're a first century Christian almost in the way that they had to communicate the gospel. It makes the scriptures come alive.
I want to thank you guys for sharing. We're getting ready to turn it over to Arliss in just a second. Let me pray for our 1 million+ international students and our ministry to them as we close. And Arliss, as soon as I finish that prayer, if you'll jump in and take over, okay? Father, I thank you so much for what was shared today, and I thank you for giving me an opportunity to minister to international students here at LSU. Father, I pray for the 1 million international students in our country right now. I pray that you would help them to come to know you in a personal way. Help us as a Christian faith, Christian community, as college ministries, college churches, to do all we can do to share with them, to love them, to care for them, to pick them up at airports, to feed them, to host them, just to be their friend. Help us to use Zoom, help us to use Facebook, help us to use personal contact, whatever it is, Father. Just help us to have a passion for reaching out to these international students. Help us to mobilize our students, help us to mobilize our churches to doing so. And just thank you so much for these that have shared today. And there's so many others, Father, that are doing some great things with international ministry. And thank you for giving us this opportunity to be together. Help us as we continue on with this these whiteboard sessions today. Praise in your name. Amen.
Well, aren't you encouraged when you hear what all is happening in a lot of different places? You know, I'm of the conviction that if we did international ministry like we ought to, that we wouldn't even need to send foreign missionaries, that we would do it through these students returning home and so forth. Hey, I've been asked to talk a little bit about, and then just us dialogue about supervising staff, supervising interns, et cetera, and so forth. I believe supervision is not about one person being smarter than everybody else. It's about having one direction, and that somebody's the one that says, hey, this is the direction we're going to go, and so forth. One of the things I've seen in a lot of our different ministries, both BCM and church campus-based, is a lot of our staffs are either part-time students, or they're grad students, or it's their first year out of college, or their first ministry experience, or whatever. And one of the things I feel real strongly about is we have a responsibility to invest in them, and if, as much as possible, see that they have a good experience, because this has a whole shaping thing, I think, to do with how they view ministry and where they go from here and so forth. I know as a college student, I began working in summers on a church staff, and that pastor really just invested in me, and I think that shaped a great deal of my view of ministry for years to come and so forth. One of the things I think is really important to realize is that younger and inexperienced staff need more supervision than experienced or people, you know, have been doing it a while. And I don't mean by that they're not as smart or, you know, whatever like that. Several years ago, even when Steve was young, Well, Arkansas had a program where they call student to student, and it was, we would have about 10 or 12 1-year or 9-month workers right out of college that would work on our staff. And for some reason or other, I was kind of the supervisor overall of all of them. And what we found was our local BCM directors were saying, well, a lot of them were saying, I'm going to treat them like a professional, just tell them to go do what they need to do and what needs doing. Well, the problem was they weren't a professional yet, and they didn't know what to do or whatever. And I even, when I would do kind of a finish up with them and what'd you learn and what would you like to do over, one of the things I heard again and again, and those of you who are, most of you on here are old veterans, you know how important the first month of school is. Almost all of them would say in some way or other, I wish I could go back and do the first month over again. Because the most critical and key time, they knew the least about what and how to do it and so forth. A couple of things I think is really huge, and I'm not utilizing different people here as Steve did, and I really want to throw it open here a little bit for your thoughts, questions, and observation experiences. But I think 2 things. I think a clear job description is huge, and most of the time there's a job description, but I think a lot of times it's not very helpful. It's just a document that we have to have and so forth. And I think in some ways it needs to say, what are they responsible for and how do they do it? Now, some years ago, I stumbled on something and I stole it from somebody and I don't have a clue who. And I would do this both with like our 1-year interns and like we had some more long-term associates or staff members. And one of the things I would do, I would say at the beginning of each semester, I want you to sit down and write for me about 8 or 10 things that you're going to do this semester that relate to your job description. And I want to be very specific, like I'm going to eat lunch in the cafeteria every Thursday. I'm going to take a new freshman to lunch every Tuesday, you know, so on and so forth. Or I'm really going to try to relate to the band on campus or whatever like that. And after they had developed that list, I would have them come back and I'd work through, now what do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? Et cetera, et cetera. And we would talk about it. And sometimes we'd kind of refine one a little bit or whatever. And then, but then a lot of times I would say, well, I want to add 1 or 2 to it. And so I would add something specific like that. And then we'd both sign off on it. And then we'd come back at the end of the semester and say, how'd that go? What did we learn there? And so forth. And I found that to be probably the most beneficial thing that we did, because I felt like sometimes that they were really wrestling with the specifics. You know, their heart was right, their desire was right, and so forth. But as y'all know, you know, you can spend a lot of time sitting in your office with students that just wander in who want to, you know, kill an hour or whatever. I also think that we have to help them process things not going well or whatever. And I used to have one assistant who would come in on Friday, and at that point I had a couch in my office. It was ugly, but boy, it was comfortable. And she would plop down on it, and Friday she was just kind of processing some things. And so I'd kind of talk through some things with her. And one of the things I learned is that we need to help them learn to process success and failure and so forth. I think another thing that's huge, and it's too bad Linda Osborne Ware is not on this conversation, but she and I worked together for 3 or 4 years, and she laughs. I believe in having an agenda. I believe in having a weekly staff meeting at a set time with a set starting and ending time. Because a long time ago, I did a master's degree in guidance counseling, and one of the things they taught us about counseling is that if in a session, if somebody knows they have an hour, then it's going to take an hour and they're going to get said what they need to say in that hour. But if they don't know how long they have, it's going to take, you know, forever. And so I'm all about saying our meeting starts at this time and it ends at that time. And here's the agenda. And I would always ask, okay, are there other things that need to be put on the agenda for our to talk about today? Well, Linda laughs. One day she saw my agenda and on it said, affirm Linda. And she had done some stuff the week before that was just really terrific. And I wanted to make sure that I told her that in our staff meeting. And she would sometimes find my agenda before our meeting and she would write on it, affirm Linda. But I believe one of the things we have to do is not take for granted the good work that folks are doing. And we need to affirm them, and particularly younger ones, affirm what we see in them, their potential and their ability and their gifts and so forth. And I think that's huge. And I think sometimes we have to model them something for them. Hey, here's the way I want you to do this, or tell me how you're going to do that, or whatever like that. Get them to think through it and so forth. Now, I think with older or more mature staff members with more experience, a lot of what you're doing is communicating. Okay, what are you doing on this? What are they doing? You know, how do we work together? How do we be going the same direction? Et cetera, et cetera. One of the things I wanted to do is just mention two things that I think are really huge. One of them is a myth, and that is there's a myth that anybody is better than nobody, and that ain't true. There's been a year or two that I had an opening for a staff member that I didn't hire anybody because I couldn't find somebody that I thought fit. And one of the worst years I ever had was when I hired somebody that I wasn't high on, but we've got to have somebody. And I'm way of the opinion that it's better to have nobody than to have the wrong body. And so beware of the myth that anybody is better than nobody. And then the other thing I would say is that chemistry in hiring is way more important than ability or resume. Now, I'm not saying, I'm looking for the best qualified person possible, but I'm not saying, again, one of those bad hires I made was because I hired somebody on the basis of their resume. They had a resume twice as good as mine and Billy Graham's, kind of deal. And yet the chemistry was not there at all. We didn't work together at all. I found myself hiding in my office, so there's danger there. One of the things I think, and you look at ability, but also say chemistry. How would this person and I work together? How would we get along, and so forth and so on. Now I want to pause there and instead of preaching this whole time or whatever. What's been your experience? What have you learned the hard way? What are supervision or staff problems or issues, etc.? Well, let me be a little more pointed. Joel, I know you at Texas A&M have some different, I think, both permanent people and like more short-term or whatever. Just from your experience, what's been the most helpful thing in working with staff and so forth?
Yeah, I totally agree with you on, you don't want the wrong person, especially in a senior position. An intern will leave soon, but if you bring someone else on longer term, you really have to I think you have to go to a whole other level with that. And interviewing, I found it's helpful to have some other people in interviews with me because they'll see things there. I have a lot of people a lot more perceptive than I am with people. With interns, I think you're exactly right. I think just giving them, the less experience they have, the more structure they need. And I found with interns, I need to give them a lot of structure, especially their first year, and not assume that they know what to do. I've found that I need to build into my schedule. If I'm sending them out to work on the community college in our area, I need to be there some and coach them and watch. And then the other thing is to make sure I'm giving them affirmation, because sometimes they'll be doing a great job, but they need to hear that from me.
Yep.
So.
Well, and they can be working hard and doing everything right and not going really well, and that's not their fault.
Yep.
Yeah. Gary, what about you? I know y'all have 2 or 3 folks or whatever.
Yeah, I couldn't affirm more some of what's been said here. Particularly, we have 2 or 3 new staff every semester that are short-term interns that do a 10-month stint. And their first few weeks, probably their first 2 months, we do a full calendar with them. So I plan their day for them the first few weeks. So I say hour by hour, this is what you're doing from 9 to 11. This is 11 to 1. This is 1 to 3. We do a daily staff meeting for their first 2 to 3 weeks. So some of those are just a 15-minute check-in. And then some of those are tactical planning meetings. And then some of those are training. oriented. We met Patrick Lencioni's book, The Death by Meeting, was really helpful to me, where he talked about, instead of having one just catch-all, eternal, long-lasting staff meeting, you do more meetings, but you make them shorter and you make them with a very narrow purpose. And so we kind of live by that model. So I have a 5 or 10 minute check-in with almost every staff, almost every day. And then we have a tactical meeting that's about a 45-minute meeting where we go over calendar and events and delegation. And then maybe every 2 to 3 weeks, we do a gathering where we talk about strategy or planning or do creative planning, but we don't do that every week. We do that more periodic, so it feels more like a treat. Maybe there's desserts at that meeting, and it gets people's creative juices flowing. But yeah, in their first few weeks, we give a ton of structure to new staff, and then as time goes on, they get a little more freedom to plan their days.
Oh, I like that. I've not heard it said like that. The idea of I plan their day for them. And I think in the beginning that's huge. One of the things that I believe in is when early on at the beginning is to give them some orientation and just sit down with them. What I would try to do is sit down with them for a whole day and work through a whole bunch of things. Here's the way, here's this, here's why, here's what I want you to do, and so forth. But one of the things I would say in the midst of that is the most important thing you can do is you're going to make a decision on whether you're going to be respected or you want to be liked, and or be everybody's buddy. And I said, don't succumb to the temptation of I just want to be everybody's buddy. And I think you can be respected and liked. But one of the things I found, particularly with young intern types, is that they want everybody to like them, and they give away the respect and so forth. And so consequently, what they say doesn't carry as much weight and so forth. Somebody else, what about either issues you faced or what you try to do with either long-term staff or intern types or whatever? And like when I went back to ministry at Arkansas State as the interim director one year, I had 2 senior assistants that I'd never had before. They were part-time students who were seniors working, and they were terrific. And they were a huge blessing to the ministry. But one of the things I learned is there was a different thing in working with them than where I'd had some professional type folks that had experience and so forth. So I think partly you have to adjust to who you have and what you have. Somebody else, what do you see, or common failure points or whatever?
Arliss, that was the question I was going to pose. Some of you, like I think in Texas, you have some staff who actually raise their support. You have some staff who are paid. So if you have on your team a paid staff person, a person who raises their own support, and also a volunteer, how do you treat them differently? What do you do? Do you do anything different with the different ones of those?
Well, that's a great question. Joel or Gary, do y'all have folks that raise their salaries?
Yeah, I'm the only person on my staff who gets full support from CP, and we have 10 staff, and our other 9 raise a portion or all their support. And we don't treat them any differently. Some of our staff are part-time, so they obviously have fewer hour restrictions, but people who raise support get a paycheck. They're supporters, just like our churches are supporting our salary so we can do missions. Their personal supporters are paying their salary so they can be fully devoted to the work. So the expectation is the same. They have to budget a certain amount of time a month. It's just in keeping track of their supporters and doing follow-up in newsletters and cultivating their supporters. But in general, they have the same standard. And we have volunteers who we don't treat like staff. And so I would just say the volunteers we don't treat like staff, but anybody that is receiving their livelihood from the work we do.
These are volunteers other than students, Gary?
Yeah, we have a few we have some alumni who are involved in discipling student leaders because it's a big task for our staff to do. We have volunteers who work with international students, but maybe 2 hours a week or 3 hours a week. They're not putting in the kind of hours that a staff does.
Jonathan Clark, I know you've got some folks you work with. What would you say you've learned or part of the secret to that working well? Jonathan's gone out to lunch.
Arliss, I'd chip in just a bit on what
Yeah.
Gary said. We have quite a few on staff, and two of us are paid by CP. The rest, we raise money. But what I've learned, I treat everyone the same, equally valued, but I have to be engaged in their fundraising too. Like sometimes I'm helping point them to donors, but just being engaged with them and them feeling the support for me in that process. And also the other thing is helping them plan a schedule so that they have time built in for fundraising in their weekly schedule. And that's really important.
Hey, Arliss, I have a question for Gary Stidham. Gary, what day do you actually have your staff meeting? How long does it look? And do you meet with them individually, plus meet with them as a group?
We do our staff meeting the front end of the week, depending on our part-timer schedule. So we try to do Monday morning or Tuesday morning. And then I just do a 5-minute check-in. I try to do it every day as people come through the office, but I don't schedule those. But our weekly staff meeting's about a 45-minute, and it's just pure tactical. It's a written agenda. It's got the bullet points for the week, and then maybe the whatever the big event on the horizon is. And so we delegate. We make sure everybody has the same information. And our staff's a little larger than most, so it's, if we tried to plan things in staff, it's a little too big to do that. So we delegate, you three are planning this event and you two have this event. But yeah, it's pure tactical. We, maybe 10 minutes of catch up and prayer, and then mostly delegate agenda decisions.
Good. I don't know if you've seen or not. Tyler, you had a question. Why don't you throw it out there verbally?
Yeah, I was just wondering, for you guys that supervise people that raise their own support, how much time do you give them per week or per month to raise their own support? Is that 5 hours a week or 10 hours a week or what?
In Texas, our rule of thumb is 10%, but it gets spread out differently through the year. So like, for instance, it's May right now, and I have one intern who's converting into a salaried staff member. So she's raising a full salary. And so she's full-time support raising, and I relieve her of any ministry responsibility. And then during the school year, it's more like, a couple hours a week, so they can do a phone call or a coffee meeting here and there. It's very little. And then maybe in December and January, that I expect them to do it a third to half of their time. So they're catching up with donors. They're making year-end requests. They're doing a good year-end mailed out newsletter. So it's about 10%, but it ebbs and flows as the year goes.
Yeah.
Good question. Somebody else?
Arliss, there was also a question from Nick about how do you encourage young staff that are hesitant to take action or unsure of themselves?
Say that again, Bill. How do you encourage what now?
It's in the chat, but it says, how do you encourage young staff that are hesitant to take action or unsure of themselves?
Well, for me, my response to that would be, I think that's particularly important early on, is where you're giving them some structure and you're giving them affirmation and giving them feedback on how things go so that they're learning. And I think early that's huge, because they want to do right, they want to please, they want to do well, but a lot of times they don't know. So I think that's where affirmation and instruction, supervision, if you will, in the beginning is huge. Any other folks want to weigh in on that? Who raised that question?
I did right here, Nick from Middle Tennessee.
Yeah, Nick, go ahead. Say another word about that.
Well, I just transitioned into more of a supervisory role at our church as family pastor, and that means we've got a lot of young and quality staff, inexperienced, eager to do well and want to do well, but are perhaps gun shy, don't want to make mistakes, and in some ways they're more passive rather than those who are maybe by nature more aggressive. And sometimes it's, pick your poison sometimes, which one's more difficult to work with. But for our context, we seem to have a small team of folks who, a few of which at least are more passive by nature. And so not wanting to do for them or do in spite of them, try to nudge them to lean in to opportunities to grow and to learn, even if that means things aren't as ideal as you hope for.
Yeah. Do any of you, do you really encourage, and I'm throwing it wide here, do any of you encourage like graduating seniors to consider raising their salary for a year and come back and work or whatever?
Before they answer that question, that was one of my questions, especially for some of these guys that have multiple staff like Joel and them, is how many of those staff are your students and how many are from other places, and how do you get, those people?
Almost all of my staff are from my ministry, and we in Texas they have a campus missionary intern program, and it's a great feeder opportunity for students to stay on and get a better understanding of ministry, and it can last 10 months or up to 2 years, and so and I actively recruit people and talk to them. We also I'll have a good number of ours that we'll talk to that'll go to other campuses to serve,
Yeah.
and even in the Northwest and places like that. So
I recently became aware it's not a Baptist ministry on another campus, another state, where they encourage their seniors to raise their salary and come back, and they have 90 to 100 of their students who do that and come back and work for them a year. I can't imagine dealing with that kind of number or whatever, but that's just part of how they operate. Bill Morrison asked the question, for those of you who have staff raise their support, does that support get funneled through your state convention, or does it go straight to your ministry or whatever? Anybody want to speak to that?
In Texas, it comes through our state convention. They're considered convention employees.
Okay.
It's
Tyler,
messy. It's messy, but it's how it works.
Yeah. Tyler, how's yours done?
Yeah, it's the same way. It kind of all goes into our budget, and then we kind of portion it out. But when people give, they give straight to our budget with
Okay.
the state convention.
Okay. Okay. All right. We got about 2 or 3 minutes left on this segment. Anybody else, question, comments, or experience you've had you want to share?
I'll ask a question about anticipated funding. What are y'all feeling so far for funding for this next semester for now? Anybody got a feel for what's happening now?
I think that's the feeling, isn't it? Who knows? I know in Arkansas, they're calling pastors and talking to them, the convention employees are, and one of the convention employees told me that in early on, that what he was getting was the smaller churches were doing fine financially, but it was the larger churches that were struggling financially, and was wondering how that might play out, or what long-term effect it'll have on other groups, like what they give to or what they support or whatever like that. Anybody any thoughts or insight into that? What question have we missed here we ought to mention right in the last couple of minutes we have? Michael Dean says that he thinks we ought to give at least 10%. Funding folks say it might need to be as much as 15 to 20% of their time or whatever. And I think that would probably vary individual to individual or whatever. Yeah.
For you guys that have interns and they come on, they raise their support, do y'all pay for them to do a training? Do y'all do a statewide training or anything like that?
yes, there's a training pretty extensive in late July, and then our state offers something again in January, and then and I'm sure Gary's like this too, and we do training with all those guys too, like Arliss talked about. I think having staff training and retreat is huge, and then I spend a lot of time also with them individually, and Rebecca does as well, with coaching and trying to help them, especially early.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of add about staff raising support. I know it's a different model than some people have, but it's really been a blessing in Texas, because our ministry, if we were dependent on CP, we'd have a staff, maybe 1.5 staff. But it frees you up to be entrepreneurial. And then the other effect is it makes a pipeline straight from your ministry to your staff. It lets you give a vision to your best, sharpest, most high initiative students. Like somebody asked a question about what do you do when you have low initiative staff members? Well, we just tend to recruit students who are doing the kinds of things already that you'd want a staff person to do, just to do it more. And so we struggle very little with motivation on our staff, just because we have people who already understand what we're doing, and we only ask people who have that understanding to join. And then the other thing is our staff who raise support, they're actually doing great financially during this time, because when people have to evaluate who they're giving to, and they're giving to, say, an organization, or they're going to cut, but they've got a personal friend who's part of their budget who's doing ministry, that's one of the last things they cut, not one of the first things they cut. So my staff who are raising support, actually, we have one girl who's had, I think, 3 donors reach out to her and say, if you lose any supporters, I want to increase mine so you don't lose anything.
Wow.
And she's lost 0, but she's had 3 offer to increase.
That's great. You know, I've heard that from other people as well, that the last thing they were going to cut was that. Yeah. Hey, one last question, and we'll wind this segment up. But do you set their salary? What determines what their salary is? That's one of the questions that I've gotten.
The state, our state had put that in place, and so it gives some guidance. And there's some leeway in it, but that's they help determine that.
Okay. Okay. All right. Very good. Well, I'm sorry, did somebody else start? Well, we're going to transition over to the next topic, and that is, we've said, you know, what if your max is 50, or that you're given some guidelines as to how many people can be in attendance at one time or whatever, and it's been said different ways. And I've recruited Tyler Huffpower, who's the director at Arkansas State, to kind of join in this discussion. And obviously none of us know the answers, and we're not even sure what guidelines are going to be, but to try to do the best we can in planning and so forth. I know maybe a few of you read, I did a blog on this recently, but let me just kind of highlight some of what I said for this, and then I want to go to Tyler and ask him some questions and so forth. You know, some might say, well, you know, we may just ignore the school guidelines. Well, I would say to you that I think that's a dangerous decision to make, because you don't want to ruin your relationship to the school, and also you don't want to lose trust of parents. So I think we have to be very careful and intentional in the decisions that we make and all of that. I talked to one college minister who has a pretty large program, and he said, well, right now we're just planning to be all small group, and if we find out at the end that we can have our regular large group meeting, we will. Obviously, that's one way to go. But some of the options that I've heard and I've mentioned is, like, for your large group meeting, you might say, okay, and I've heard 2 or 3 different. I've heard, you know, a group of 50 might be the largest. I've heard that some have said 1/3 of whatever your capacity is, etc. So, you know, there's different things being thrown out. And as one school official said last week, you know, it changes day to day, so that they don't know either. But like if you have a large group meeting at 7 o'clock, maybe you have a 7 o'clock meeting and a 9 o'clock meeting, you know, or you have a Tuesday and a Thursday. You know, I even mentioned to someone the possibility of you have a freshman only large group worship event or whatever. Now, if I did a freshman only, I would recruit a few sharp upperclassmen to be a part of that freshman only large group experience for a variety of reasons, to connect and, you know, discipleship and so forth. Somebody said, well, you know, maybe we could have a freshman sophomores this week and junior seniors this week, and next week, you know, we do a round or whatever like that. Somebody also mentioned the possibility of doing simultaneous small groups, where they had a center, they were going to do small groups in their building at the same time or whatever. You know, a whole nother issue are lunch programs. I know many of you have a lunch program. Okay, how in the world do we do those during this time and so forth? Let me bring in Tyler at this point, and he and I were talking the other day about lunch program and so forth, and I thought some of what he said was really interesting. Tyler, why don't you share some of just the thoughts you've had as options or possibilities on that?
Yeah, I've been talking to a lot of different folks, and just reaching out to people in different states and saying, hey, what are you thinking for the fall and this and that. And really, I get kind of multiple answers. One is, I'm not worried about it. It's going to go back to normal by the time fall starts. The other one is, well, I mean, some people at our university really think, you know, we're only going to be online, or we're not going to get to meet, or athletics are going to be canceled. And so school's just going to look really different. And then there's a lot of folks who just say, hey, I don't want to think about it yet. But we're getting really close to June. And so for us, that's really where we got to put some concrete plans down. And so I reached out to someone at our university, and she told me to keep it confidential, but I won't mention any names. But basically she said a couple of things. One, at our university, they're not planning on having any Greek recruitment. They're planning on, if the university were to open right now, they would limit everything on campus to 33% capacity. Now, all this is subject to change, and she's hopeful that it does change. But she says every event that they're planning through the school, you know, for Welcome Week and those kind of things, they're coming up with kind of three plans: a full plan, a percentage, like a 33% type plan, and then like a 15 under plan based on what the governor says in our state. And so for us, that's kind of the mode that we're starting to process through. Okay, we've already created a plan A with our students kind of before they left. Now we're starting to think through, okay, what could plan B or C be? And for us, you know, if they let us do 33% capacity, I think we could fit about 75 students in our space. So we might just run like a multi-service type deal. But the big thing for us is lunch. And how you do that, and how you do that well. We have a lot of older ladies who come from churches. Are they even going to want to come to campus is a question. Are they going to want to put themselves at potential risk? Would they give us money instead so that we could you know, just cook the lunch ourselves? But then also lunch is usually a come all event. So how do you cap it? And so we're considering a lot of different things. One idea that Arliss had was to do a freshman lunch just for freshmen. You know, obviously invite some upperclassmen to be there, that kind of thing. Another idea that we're leaning more towards is doing a major lunch. So like 1 week we'll invite just education majors, and 1 week we'll invite, you know, just engineering majors, and 1 week we'll invite just this kind of majors. And then also we'll kind of cater the speakers to that particular, you know, occupation or whatever. The deal is that's just a lot more work and legwork and recruiting than it is to say, hey, everybody come. And it's hard to know if you're going to have 5 people or if you're going to have 50 people show up, you know, from a particular major. But there aren't, in my opinion right now, any solid, you know, this is definitely going to work. So that's just one of the big options that we're looking at as far as lunch.
Others of you that have lunch programs, any thoughts you've had, or we will or won't do this or whatever?
Well, Arliss, we're fortunate that we've got 3 different places where we can seat, you know, 50, 60 students, up to 50 students simultaneously. So what I've thought about doing is if we keep our money lunch at the same time, they would come and we'd go to one room or 3 different rooms and meet simultaneously. The church would still provide the food somehow. We may have to provide the food 3 different places, but that's something I thought about.
Steve, do you have a speaker at that, or how would that work program-wise or whatever in 3 different rooms?
Well, we've primarily gone to, at our lunch program, as I mentioned, international student ministry, we've primarily gone to student table sharing. It's almost all table sharing, and then we have someone closes out at the end. We don't really have a speaker from the stage. It's more, we have organized questions for them to share at their tables, and so that would lend itself really well to that.
Okay, good. Somebody else? You know, one of the things in thinking about night meetings or your large group, y'all come type worship event, someone had said, you know, in some ways the advantage of doing like 2 or 3 different ones would be that we could have a different band or a different worship leader, and it would give us opportunity to use different people and kind of develop some more people along and that sort of thing. And I think that's one way to see it, rather than, oh my, you know, how do we do this with all these different ones or whatever, but to say, okay, it's an opportunity to utilize different people. You know, another factor that I know many of you have been involved in doing something we've done for years called survival, and it's called different things, different places, like a freshman event. Some places it's a weekend event, some places it's a one-day event, et cetera, et cetera. And how do you do survival? For many, that is the kickoff of connecting with freshmen, involving freshmen. I know Tyler does survival, or has in the past. Tyler, what have your thoughts or questions been in that area?
We hope that the school reopens. That's our biggest thing. It's just really hard because that usually is certainly over 100 folks at least in the building at one time. And so we're hoping that we can do something. Some alternatives that I've been thinking about is if we move something to outdoors. Sometimes you can get around some of the numbers for that. Or we might have to offer shorter multiple sessions, or something every night and try to do less. But kind of our typical thing has been a 3 or 4 hour event on the first day or right before the first day, and we kind of plug them into Bible study groups that they'll be in all semester. So I don't think we'll be able to do that unless they lift restrictions. But
yeah. I was talking with someone about their welcome event, and they said, well, one of the things we're thinking we'll do is we will get 4 or 5 good core upper class students who will host a welcome event, and they'll be simultaneous at these 3 or 4 or 5 different places, even houses where students live, apartment complexes, etc. And we will take food or provide the food or have the food delivered there, and there'll be welcome events at different places. And I like the idea of that, regardless of our situation, because it seems like has a capability of connecting to a wider variety of people and a different group of students and so forth. Anybody have thoughts about your welcome event?
I think the struggle on the welcome events for us in particular is that as our university is in such a holding pattern, it's right now that, they've told us they don't know what they're going to do or even allow until really July. A lot of what we had scheduled and planned was outdoor type things. We were going to do a big music festival with food trucks this year, a big worship night. We were going to do a steak night, 99-cent steak night. And so we're just almost in a wait and see kind of game. There's the benefit of a lot of that being outside, which helps with social distancing. But while our property itself is not the university's property, so that gives us a little more freedom to do things inside our building. If we do something outside, we're back on university property. And so therefore we've got to, fully play by their rules. So we're just sort of in a wait and see on that, because the university doesn't want to give us an answer yet. And I understand that fully, because if I was them, I wouldn't want to either.
Yeah. One thing that I've thought about, Arliss, is actually doing by last names, and who knows how your numbers would turn out by that. But we've considered, A through G having a welcome event on Monday, and, and then the next group of students, and just having the same welcome event multiple days of the week, but just for different last names. And I don't know how I'd be on numbers. I'd really be just guessing, but that's one of the things we're kicking around if we really aren't able to gather.
So Rodney and Tommy, your buildings are not on campus property, right? Are you going to will we all think differently if your building is not on campus property as opposed to ones that are on campus?
Well, I'm very much like what Arliss said. We own our building, we own our property. I could do anything I want here, but I don't want to make an enemy out of the university, because we really are seen as a part of the university. So I'm going to do my best not to go against them in any way, even though the world's free. But
John, we've been given some guidelines, some preliminary guidelines from the state. A lot of the guidelines they've given us from the state office, from the GBMB, has been very similar to what they've suggested to churches, which involves social distancing and those kind of things. So, we're doing some things like trying to measure out what it looks like and how many we can fit in the room if we do 6 feet social distancing and so forth. But we're also just like Rodney in the sense that, we've got that freedom, but if everybody else is keeping it under 50 or everybody else is keeping it at a third, we don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot long term.
Well, and I imagine it's like in Arkansas, a lot of what the school is going by are the governor's guidelines. And so, that's basically going to be, I think, the guidelines for all of us as well. But who knows?
Our particular instance, like we own our building, but the school owns our land. So we rent from the school's land, and our lease is up in a couple of years. And I really want them to renew our lease for about 25 more years. So, don't want to push too many buttons as far as that goes.
Have any of you guys gotten your hands on the university systems of your states documents on what they're sending out to universities yet on any suggestions they're making? Because we got our hands on the other day a 31-page document for the state of Georgia, and what we found out is that, I mean, as much as we want to have these pie in the sky dreams that, oh, maybe it'll be all solved by August, they've been given 4 scenarios for coming back, and none of those scenarios are normal. The best case scenario is come back with social distancing. So I don't know if you guys have, but if you look, you may be able to find, and you may be able to do some investigative work and find what your states are thinking so far.
I thought something was really interesting. I think it was in the New York Times. The University of Kentucky allowed them to be in on one of those meetings, and the scenarios are incredible. UT has 15 different scenarios that they're talking about. One of the strange ones for all of it was that in order to reduce the capacity of the university, that only freshmen would be allowed to return to the university because they need the experience, and all upperclassmen would be online. So how do you even minister to your new folks, but none of your old folks there? It's crazy.
Well, that's the first time I've heard that one. That's interesting. Well, I've been all about freshman ministry, so there you go. Somebody else, y'all are raising great things. Keep on.
Our plan in South Georgia is we're going to be outside for all of our major meetings, at least for the first part of the fall semester, weather permitted. And it's usually going to be hot, humid, a lot of gnats, but we'll deal with that. But we've got some space outside that we can gather a pretty good group and still do the social distance and that type of thing. And then we'll use our small groups and discipleship groups for high touch with students going forward from that. But I think we're going to be outside for most of the beginning of the year at least. Jeff,
do you have facility's not the right word, but do you have a space that really fits that, or are you going to go somewhere? Where are you going to be outside?
We'll be in our parking lot. So we're going to set up in our parking lot. We got a good sized parking lot that we could probably host close to 200 students at a time if we needed to in our parking lot and still do the social distance that we need to. So we're fortunate in that. So that's one of the reasons why we're going to kind of go outside. It's actually something we usually do at the beginning of the year anyway. It gives us a little bit more visibility to students doing stuff outside. So it's not so much out of the ordinary, except we're going to push a little bit more planning or more programming toward outside and do that for a little bit longer.
Okay, good thinking. Somebody else, y'all are doing great.
Guys, one thing that we've emphasized to our leadership is that the benefit of how we do ministry is that our small groups, whatever we call them, wherever we're at, they're not going to take a hit. I mean, they're really not. And if they're healthy and they're functioning the way that they're supposed to, and they're open groups and they're growing and we're multiplying those things, we're good to go in that side of things. The evangelism aspect of things, the outreach aspect of things, it may be that looks more where it's less program driven and it's more training driven, where we're having to train our people more and it becomes truly a lifestyle. But we really do see, we've tried to emphasize that if push comes to shove, whatever they tell us we can do or can't do, let's try to reinvent the wheel where we need to reinvent the wheel, but let's also focus on the things we already do well that will fit this COVID-19 situation. And let's drive that baby as hard as we possibly can.
One of the things that I've said is, it's really easy to think that the way we've been doing it is the perfect way and the best way and whatever. And I think one of the things that may come out of this is some new ideas that we think, hey, this is better than how we were doing it before. And I think that's kind of one part of the mindset that we have to have is, okay, the wheel wasn't invented then and we're done, but what's next, and I think there's always a next. Of course, I started in college ministry a long time ago when we were having, 5-day, noonday devotionals and 3 at night, 8 programs a week and all of that. And, well, we haven't done that in a long time, but I think we do better now. And so I think part of it is to say, okay, what may be next here? How do we do this next? Not just as good, but next better even.
Yeah. Hey, Arliss.
Go.
Hey, yeah, one of the things, this was just, it kind of came up as I was talking to some of my college ministers that are pretty involved with, their churches are really involved with our ministry. And we kind of have like a commuter college vibe in Little Rock. But we're kind of shifting, or potentially we might shift away from like the large group setting. And one of the students that works in the campus experience office told me, she's a graduate of our ministry, and she knows, I call it the ground game, like doing the tabling and all that kind of stuff. And I kind of asked her like a week ago, I think, I was like, hey, I'm thinking about a couple things for the fall. And I kind of sent it to her in an email, and she just sent me an email back. She goes, just develop the ground game. And so what we're thinking about doing, and some of the churches are on board with this, is maybe even shifting how they interact with us. And right now, UALR particularly is giving us a little bit more freedom. Like those churches might bring like pastries one day or coffee, and we already do cheese dip like as a weekly outreach, but even doing like a morning, afternoon on a couple days, or doing them different days. And right now our Sodexo services that do our food stuff, they're essentially going to waive those just because of the situation that's kind of going on with being super limited with, large group gatherings and all that kind of stuff. So I'm seeing a little bit more of a flexibility with the campus, where before they probably would have shut me down with like pastries and stuff like that, but they're kind of a little bit more open to letting us do a little bit more on the tabling end than what we normally would.
Good word. We got about 5 minutes left here. What do we want to raise? Who wants to throw something else out or whatever? What if we, how do we deal with a maximum number if we're given that? And somebody said the other day, as I was talking to them, they said, are we really going to have somebody at the door counting and we say, I'm sorry, we've reached our maximum number? And boy, that's tough. That's tough.
Hey, Arliss, somebody asked, does anybody have any plans for how to do a socially distant lunch?
Yeah. You folks that do lunch, what are you going to do? You're going to social distance lunch? And if so, how? Okay.
Did Tom Knight, are you at Vanderbilt yourself? And what did you learn from the first crisis? He must not be there.
He's AWOL.
I can address this to the lunch issue.
Yeah,
we had one event. Our Missouri started to open up just the last day of finals week was our first day that we could actually have an event. And so we did everything we could to, encourage social distancing and hand sanitizing stations and all that. We set up tables inside with 3 chairs for every 6-foot banquet table. And I still had 11 students sitting at one table. They were so tight, they actually formed a second ring where they were just standing because they're that desperate to be with each other again. And so I'm just, that's my concern. I'm not sure how to police that inside
the building because they're just going to move chairs. Depending on I guess what you're having to sit at. But yeah, so that's my concern is I don't know I just have no idea how to make that work. But it is a cornerstone for us because so many of our churches connect to our ministry through that lunch every week.
All right. Well, and I go back to what Tyler said. If you have a church serving lunch, and that's been your norm, are they going to be willing to come and do that? And in many of those settings, it's older retired people, and are they certainly going to be willing to do that? And if so, how do you take care of them and protect them and so forth, which is a whole nother deal.
It might even change the way that we have to serve the food. Like they come through a line where we are, and the ladies plopping on the plates, reverse buffet, I guess. I don't know what you say, but even if our ladies are wearing masks, it still means, 100, 150 students walk past the salad bowl and breathed on it, even though somebody else scooped it. So we might have to do more of a table service type deal.
Hey, Arliss, I've been real quiet listening, but let me just tack on one thought. I think how we approach this is going to be key for our students and for the folks for the universities where we work. I think if we look at this at the end as the end of the world and kind of have that attitude and mindset, that's what everybody else will have as well.
Right.
And so I think we have to do our best to be positive, do our best to see this as temporary and not the end of the world as we know it. This may change the way we do things for a while. That's not all bad. It's good to shake things up every once in a while, and I think we shouldn't be afraid of it. I think it's been pointed out a couple times in just this last 30 minutes that we have to be good stewards of what we've been given and good neighbors with the university that we work with. And I think to go outside that and to go around or try to go around that is a mistake that will last for a long time. I think it won't be for a season, it'll be for a long time. So that's just a kind of a general word, but I'm trying to encourage our folks not to panic. Don't think this is the end of ministry as we know it. There's always another way. And sometimes you just have to find it. That just takes a while. This is good. That's why this has been so good. Put all these minds together. Thanks for this.
All right. Anybody on this topic? Last word. You had something terrific you were going to say. And
Andy raised his hand. I think he had a question.
Who did?
Andy Simbala.
Yeah, Andy. Where are you?
Hi, Andy here. I'm up in the Northeast in Pennsylvania, so it might be a little different context. But my question is, if we are not allowed on campus, if campuses are doing fully online classes, what are just some ideas, some brainstorming for how to reach freshmen, how to do outreach, evangelism, get new contacts if we can't be on campus, to do tables, to do a lunch, to knock on doors. Any ideas on that? Because I think at least, for some campuses that might be reality, and I'd love to just brainstorm some ideas to be able to do if that is the case. Thanks.
Well, I think you have two or three different issues there. One is, without orientations on campus, we've been talking about that. How do you get names of students, et cetera, et cetera? And then, if students are online or whatever, I really recommend the idea that Middle Tennessee is doing, and Bill did an interview with, and I just blanked on her name, Bill.
Haley.
Yeah. Haley Cowan, isn't it, at Middle Tennessee. And I know Stacy Murphy. Stacy, are you still on? Okay, Stacy's gone. They've had some real success with it. And what session was that, Bill? And he can go back and listen to it, I think.
Yeah, it's the April 16th was reaching and connecting with incoming freshmen. And there were a lot of ideas about, especially how do you get lists and that kind of stuff. And then I think it was the actual little blurb with Haley got suggested as a result of that meeting. And I think it was on the 23rd, just at the very beginning.
Have you checked the mail? I'm going to go out there and check it.
Just at the very beginning of that you can see that little blurb with Haley as well.
The college minister at my church here has talked with Haley and really been impressed with that. And she's developing some stuff that she's doing as a result of our conversation with Haley. So that's Haley at Middle Tennessee State as well. Hey, thanks for this time. We're going to transition here, and I'm going to hand off to Bill Noe, and we'll talk resources and all of that. Hey, I'm going to continue as I hear things. I'm going to put some of the different ideas and so forth on my blog, and you know, shoot me stuff, and I'll try to help spread it around out there and put it different places. So, and sometimes just even posting your questions helps. So let me know if you got something there or see something good or just have a thought and so forth. So here's Bill Noe.
Yeah, well, thank you guys so much for all the great thoughts and ideas. And like Mike said, you know, we are so much better together when we can pull, even if it's our, just pulling our questions together. I think there's something that's helpful there. So this last section, just wanted to reserve some time to let folks share resource ideas, you know, whether it's stuff that you want to be able to use some of the downtime in the summer, or if it's, you know, resources that are really helpful to use with students when everybody comes back in the fall and that kind of thing. But I kind of have several different categories of resources in mind that I want us to kind of talk about. So I'll go ahead and kind of let you know those categories now. And then if you have something that doesn't fit in a category, we can certainly throw that in at the end as well. But first, we'll spend some time talking about book recommendations, and then we'll talk about podcasts. And then lastly, we'll talk about websites, and that could maybe be a catch-all for other resource ideas that you might have. So to start with, just want to throw out the idea of books that you're reading or you've been told about that are on your list to read that you would recommend to others. Would love for you to, especially if you have read it and would recommend it, share kind of a little synopsis. And if you're able to drop something in the chat to everybody that might be interested in finding it, that'd be helpful as well. So, book ideas. No one has a reading list.
Hey, I'll go, Bill. This isn't, I mean, it's one that I enjoy personally, but it's one that I am actually developing a series of videos that we're going to put out for students. It came out last year before last CMF, so it's not super new, but Different College Experience by Brian Mills and Ben Trueblood. It's a B&H book, so Bill can probably give you the hookup somehow. But anyways, it's just a real good for students who are transitioning into college life or maybe new Christians. Just kind of what is the gospel, and then how does that translate into living your life in college and using wisdom in your relationships and evangelism and making disciples and all kinds of practical things. And he does a really good job of intertwining scripture to just give it a solid biblical foundation.
Thanks, Tyler. One thing I'll add about that book, I've had a lot of people comment on how helpful it's been, and I think maybe initially it was one of the main use cases was a gift for churches to be able to give to seniors when they graduate. But I've talked to a lot of both church-based and campus-based ministries that have just even used it with their leadership team to read through. And I think some of the different chapters have allowed for some real robust conversation within their ministries to think through how are we going to do ministry on campus, and has just kind of helped give them a framework to have some really helpful conversations around ministering to college students. So yeah, this is a great one to check out.
I actually contacted Brian Mills and I said, hey, you should make a discussion guide for small groups out of this. And he said, no, I'm too busy. But if you can make that happen, Bill, that'd be real helpful.
Good to know.
Did you see Jared Gregory's comment on that? Said they're going to use the topics in it for their freshman Bible studies.
Any other books like that that especially you might recommend to a student or for students to work through during the semester?
Hey, Bill.
Hey, Bill, oh, go ahead.
Bill, for me, the number one book I would give a student who has any interest in international student ministry is a short book called Foreign to Familiar. If they have any interest in missions or especially working with international students, refugees, immigrants, serving overseas in any way, Foreign to Familiar would be my first one I would give them.
Great, thanks, Van. Somebody else was getting ready to recommend something?
Yeah, Bill, I have one. It's called The Next Christians. And basically what it talks about is 7 main channels of influence as far as like how you can train. It's not specifically for student ministry, but it does teach you how to be a Christian that embeds himself or herself in these 7 main aspects of culture. And so it's one that kind of takes the premise of, let's say we're persecuted, let's say we can't gather together and stuff like that. It's a different reason, but it's the same premise. And it really kind of instructs you as to how to look at all of these different ways that you can minister within the context of personal ministry or small group ministry. And so basically the thought process is that you are a restorer to whatever context you're in. And so that's one that I've really enjoyed. I read it about 2 years ago. I've been listening to it again on Audible, but it's really good, and it really gives you a lot of thought as to how to impact from a much smaller scale than like what a lot of times what we're used to is trying to plan big events. This really focuses on the small type things, and so it's really cool in that way.
Great, thanks, Joe. So that would actually be one that you could. It sounds like it would have value both to just you reading as a leader and thinking about, but also could be something that you use with your student leadership teams to take them through and kind of challenge them to evaluate how you do ministry on the campus that you serve.
Yeah, it's one that we've used to train our student leaders, and it also does have a discussion guide with it as well. I think it's 7 channels. I think it's like 7 or 8 chapters long, and so you could do a leadership study on it, or different types of things. But it's been very useful to us, and it also helps you to form a common language with your leaders, so that you're all kind of talking about the same thing: discipleship, restoration, all of these things, and they mean the same thing. And so there's less chance of misunderstanding. And so it really is a good resource.
Who is the author?
Let me pull it up real quick. I was looking at the reason I took so long to say was because I was looking to see if I had it here. I'm at my office. I think I have it at my house. Let's see.
Hey.
It is.
It's Gabe Lyons.
Yes, that's the one. Gabe Lyons. It's a white book with I guess the study guide is black, but it's The Next Christians: How to Live the Gospel and Restore the World by Gabe Lyons is the full title.
Great. Any other book suggestions that anybody would give? What about more in the vein of just leadership development for yourself?
Yeah, Bill, I couldn't get my mic unmuted, but I was just going to add also Faith for Exiles. It's that new book by Dave Kinnaman and Mark Matlock. It's excellent. 5 practices for the next generation. It's really good.
Did you say Faith for Exiles?
Yes. I'll put it in the chat.
Missouri just took our teams through Turn the Ship Around by David Marquette, which is just an excellent resource. And he was a ship captain in the Navy, turned the worst submarine in the fleet into the best ship in naval history, according to the naval records. Then he found out he could make a lot more money consulting and leadership because that's how he did it. But just a lot of useful insights into some of the mechanics of leadership and how they were able to establish a unit where everybody is thinking instead of just one leader is sort of giving orders and micromanaging everybody. And I found that incredibly helpful. I noticed at the beginning of the year at a barbecue when a student asked me if they could put ice in the ice chest, I realized this is a problem. We had a great time going through it, and there's a lot of leadership material attached to it as well. The story is fun to read, but a lot of the practical stuff that goes along with it is good. He's not a believer, although several of the people are who work on his staff. So.
Great, thanks for that suggestion. Another one that I've heard a lot of people, I haven't read it myself yet, but I've keep hearing people comment on it and say how great it was and helpful, is Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. Has anybody read that, and would you recommend or say anything about that? Nope, not. Maybe one to add to your list. What about book ideas that are maybe just for fun, even fiction that you think you might recommend and would throw out to the group for people that are looking for some light, fun summer reading?
Well, you may not appreciate a guy named Robert Service. He wrote poems. He was he was sent to the Yukon to be a teller at a bank, and he wrote the Shooting of Dan McGrew and the Cremation of Sam McGee. So if you haven't heard those poems, they're really fun poems. And I like reading O. Henry. Remember The Gift of the Magi? They're just short stories, and he was another guy that had just kind of many jobs in his lifetime. But I love reading O. Henry as well.
One I would recommend is Before Happiness, and it's not an oh boy, be happy, feel good, but one of the things he talks about, I think it's really great, he talks about eliminating the noise in your life that allows you to really focus on more what's important and to be productive and so forth. So it's Before the Happiness by Sean Aker.
Hey, Bill.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed reading 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You. I don't know if you've talked about that before. And I read that in conjunction with digital minimalism. And so for people who are struggling with how do we get these things out of our lives, or at least get them under control, it was really helpful. So it's very practical. The first one, the 12 ways your phone is changing you. And it could be something students could even walk through as a study group together. I think there's 12 chapters, and you could do, maybe 2 chapters at a time or something. And he's got some really good things to say. It's very scriptural based and practical at the same time. And he starts out, saying he's got 2 iPads, 3 computers, and 2 or 3 phones. And so he's not slamming technology. He's just saying you have to control it. So,
who's the author of that?
Tony
Riker, maybe Ranky, Tony, last name is Ranky. I've forgotten the first name. I think it's Tony, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
Um,
I'm sure Google will pull it up.
yeah. And then the digital minimalism was really good too. If you're needing someone to kind of kick you in the pants and help you organize your life without constant interruptions from digital goblins, it's pretty good.
I was trying to avoid writing that one in the chat because I realized I'm not 100% sure that I know how to spell minimalism, but I gave it my best.
Don't ask me. I'm terrible at that too, so don't ask me. And that guy is Cal Newport. I think is his name. Is that his name? Cal Newport? I'm terrible with the names of the authors a lot of times, but I think that's who that is. He's written several similar things like that. So
I still remember the word in 5th grade that I lost the spelling bee on. So I was second place.
What was the word, Bill?
It was illegal. I spelled it like a sick eagle instead of. So maybe it's because I've never done anything illegal in my life, so that's just word I don't know anything about. Couple other categories of books too that I was thinking about that I wanted to throw out. Anything just in the with the realities of COVID, anything that you've read, there's probably not a book yet on how to be an expert at navigating COVID, but just some anything that you've read that has helped you with principles or that kind of thing to develop, plans for the fall, or anything that you've read that's just kind of helped your mindset in settling in with what we may be looking at for the fall.
Higher Ed, was it Inside Higher Ed had the 24 scenarios articles or something, which might help somebody just to run through the hoops. That's very tailored to this audience. Was it Chronicle of Higher Education or Inside Higher Ed? I can't remember. It was one of those.
Bill, can we get that posted on our stuff here?
I know I shared it on my Facebook page, but I don't know if I can get back and find it and reshare it. If anybody else, if that rings a bell with anybody, feel free to drop the link in the chat.
I'll see if I can find it.
Kind of along that vein, something that I feel like we mentioned it, maybe it was mentioned on one of these calls, but kind of that thinking between, recognizing what we're going through, if it's a ice age versus a blizzard versus a winter, and kind of the length of severity of what we're facing. I don't know if that's a whole book or not, but you could probably Google blizzard, winter, ice age, and get some stuff on that. And that was helpful for me in just thinking about planning for, multi scenarios into the fall. So Jason posted the 15 fall scenarios link, so that's in there now. And then Joe also recommended Leading Major Change in Your Ministry by Jeff Orge, and anything by Dr. Orge is worth reading, and this one especially, may be helpful during this time. Jared kind of posted a question: any good gospel saturated writings dealing with systemic racism that any of you would recommend? So that's obviously a very timely question, and would love to hear if anybody has any book suggestions related to that. I know I've seen a lot of short posts and blogs and that kind of thing in the last few days, but I I don't know that I've seen many people post a lot of book specific. I know we just published a book called, I think the title is just Advocates, by Dhati Lewis, who's a pastor in Atlanta and a VP with the North American Mission Board. And he addresses kind of some ways to help us think about becoming advocates, especially in the racial reconciliation space.
Yeah, I haven't read it yet, but I'm interested in Ben Watson's new book that he's just put out. I think it'll address some of those things.
Another good suggestion. And Tom, there's apparently several options for digital minimalism. If you get a chance to, oh, never mind. He's on it. Cal Newport is the author of digital minimalism that he suggested. And then kind of just the last book category that I was going to throw out there was kind of related to probably leadership books for yourself, but you know, probably most of you all are out of seminary and haven't been in a classroom setting in a while, but any kind of books that maybe would lean deeper theologically that have been helpful for you and just kind of continuing to sharpen your skills in theology? Anybody would recommend one?
Bill, this is not exactly theology, but I did read this past, oh, where are we? I can't remember. Fall, I guess it was fall, winter, I don't know, Christmas. It's just all the same. My schedules are all messed up. I don't go anywhere. It's called Dominion. It's by a British historian named Tom Holland. And it's actually quite interesting because even though he's an atheist, you know, he says that he's a cultural Christian because everything he believes came from Christianity. And so he goes through the book and shows how modern Western secular people adhere to many of the values of Christianity. And he shows how that happened and how people took the values but jettisoned God. And so it's a really interesting book that could help people rethink about how they talk with skeptics or post-Christian American students. It's not a short read by any means, but it's interesting. And there's also he did several video/podcast with N.T. Wright where they discussed the book. N.T. Wright is a Christian and Tom Holland is an atheist. So it was interesting. It was really interesting for me to think through some of that.
Great. Also, speaking of N.T. Wright, Tyler recommended Surprised by Hope as another book to maybe check out. Well, we got a few minutes left, so let me kind of shift gears to podcast. Anybody have any podcasts that they would recommend? You need to pull out your phone and see which ones you subscribe to.
So while you're thinking, obviously, we might consider one of the greatest contemporary apologists, Ravi. They buried Ravi yesterday, Ravi Zacharias, and there will be a service you may already know tomorrow at 11:30 that'll be broadcast from Louis Giglio's church, Passion Church in Atlanta, at 11:30. If y'all are interested in joining his family and their staff from RZIM. And Michael Ramsden is their new president, and the staff will have a pretty strong challenge to manage kind of what happens from now, but there'll be a special service tomorrow at 11:30 for Robbie it'll be on YouTube and Facebook, but it's at Louis Church in Atlanta. Just put that in your thinking for tomorrow.
Thanks for that. Be sure to click on the chat button at the bottom. Several other folks have added some books in that you might also be interested in checking out. I just put a link to the Lifeway has a leadership podcast network. And so it's kind of a curated list of podcasts that are specifically helpful to Christian ministry and church leaders. One of the podcasts in there is the 5Q, 5 Leadership Questions podcast, which you may or may not have heard of, but it has a huge following. They just kind of ask 5 questions and bring on different Christian leaders to just kind of answer those questions. And so it kind of has a consistent structure, but a lot of folks have found that to be really helpful. Another one that I know is a part of this network is J.D. Greer's podcast. So you can go there and find several different ideas in one place if you're interested. And then another one that I've heard, I don't think Steve Turner's on this, but I've heard him mention it numerous times. And every time he talks about it, it kind of piques my interest, but it's a podcast called This Cultural Moment. And I think it's from a church planner up in the Northwest. And so it's really, maybe especially for some of us in the South, may stretch the way that we have always thought about church and different theological topics, and kind of help see those through the lens of those outside the church. So that might be something else to consider. Tyler also echoed This Cultural Moment. Ask NT Wright Anything, the Lead Defend podcast, which is out of Arkansas, and it's targeted for students. Might be one that you want to let your students know about. And then the Carrie Newhoff Leadership podcast is another good one there. Any other recommendations, or maybe it's just pastors that you regularly go back and listen to their sermons that really feed your soul that you would want others to know about?
I like listening to Richard Blackaby has a leadership podcast. It's just usually 25 or 30 minutes, but it's interesting because he also evaluates leadership books and biographies of leaders and points out some of their leadership abilities. And so to me, it's been interesting to listen to that.
Okay, great suggestion. Well, if anything comes to mind in any of these other categories, feel free to share. But just in these last couple minutes, the last thing that I wanted to open it up is websites or, some other kind of resource that is helpful. Maybe it's a website that's you go to for help with technology. Maybe it's a website that you just like to go to and look at for design inspiration as you're thinking about how to create images and that kind of thing for stuff that you're going to put in front of your students. Anything related to any of that? One website I know a few of y'all have used, this is more for buying stuff, and I think it's still active right now. I don't know as things continue to change with China, but Alibaba.com is kind of like the Amazon of China, and it takes a while to get stuff, but you can get ministry supplies and that kind of thing way cheaper through that than you can Amazon. As an example, especially fall outreach kind of stuff. At Collegiate Week, we bought, those big banner flags. They're like teardrop flags that have a stand. The first year that we moved to Falls Creek, I bought, I think, like 10 through kind of our normal channels, and it was several $1,000s. The next year we needed some more, and I found them on Alibaba. I think I got 10 again for like $300, and maybe they were a little less quality, but I mean, we were using them for, it was a no-brainer, and was very pleased with them. So, especially some of those things that maybe are big purchases that you have been putting off might be worth checking out on Alibaba.com.
Bill, how long did it take to get them? I've heard some people say lately something they bought like that it took forever for it to come.
Yeah, I mean, it has to go on a boat from China. So I think once I gave them all the artwork and, finalized it, I got it within a month. So, if it's something you need in August, you probably want to start thinking about it now, but you should have plenty of time. All right, any final thoughts on any kind of resource before we wrap up?
Hey, Bill, does Lifeway have any new stuff coming out that's geared towards young adults?
I just saw, this isn't a new thing, I just saw somebody today post about over the summer they are doing they're doing Bible studies. Maybe it's with freshmen or some new studies that are starting with Ben Stewart's James study that we did a few years ago called This Changes Everything. So that continues to be useful in that space. But we also, in thinking about Ravi Zacharias' passing, we did a study with him. It's probably been about a year old, but Jesus Among Secular Gods, that also is super relevant and helpful on the college campus. So that might be another one as far as Bible study goes to check out. Cool. Well, again, thank you guys so much for joining us, and I hope this was a little bit of a different but helpful format for us to try. It seemed like a lot of people got a chance to share and ask questions, so I think that was a win. But just as we close out, let me pray for us, and then we'll be done. Father, I do thank you so much for just this time that we've had together. I thank you for just the privilege it is to gather with other friends and colleagues who care about ministering to college students. And thank you for how you've used this time just to sharpen us and encourage us and point us to other resources that may help us as we continue to carry out the mission that you've called us to of reaching every college student on every college campus throughout North America. God, thank you for these friends who share that passion and for the way that you've gifted them to do just that. I pray that these next couple of months will be refreshing for them, but also strategic as they plan for a fall that may look different than any fall we've ever encountered before. And so, God, we are so desperate for your wisdom and your guidance, and we thank you for how you'll give it. Thank you that you care even more about these students that we're going to have opportunities to interact with through our campuses. And so we just beg for your leadership, and we thank you for your guidance. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. Thank you, guys.
Hey, Arliss and Bill, and well, I guess Steve's gone, but thank